That's fun, right? What a good song. Now, okay, that song isn't, it's not praising God, right? That's not a praise song for God. But I specifically selected that song for today because, well, first of all, it is a great song. I mean, let's just be honest, right? But it is a wonderful song about life. If you pay attention to the words, right? It's just people trying to get through, trying to get by, trying to, make something happen. And it has this great imagery of people standing or living in street lights. They're just going, and street lights, I mean, just take a second and think about what a street light is. It's this little island of light, and then outside of the light is what? Darkness, boogeymen, evil things. Who knows what's outside of those lights? And so if you're living in a world of street lights, if you're a street light person, you're hopping from one little bastion of light to the next one, and you're hoping that somewhere in between horrible doesn't happen. Isn't that a lot like life? And so I think that there's a place for that song in a worship setting, especially today, to talk about life, because today is the last day in our 7-week transformation series, and as you begin your last week, you'll learn about vocation. And Martin Luther was one of these who thought vocation was the most important concept in a person's life, because often we talk about vocation as a job. And it is a job. It can be a job, right? When we talk about vocation, what you do for a living is also your vocation. But that might just be your occupation. That might just be something you do. It might not be who you are. It might be something you do. Now, that doesn't mean that isn't your vocation or can't be your vocation as well. But when I talk about vocation, when Martin Luther talks about vocation, when we think vocation, what I want you to think of is not just what you do to earn money, but what you do. What do you do? What is your life? What has God called you to do? Do you know God's plan for you in your life? That would be understanding your vocation. How will you overcome the darkness in your life? And there will be darknesses in your life. You will have to leave that street light. And you will have to go out into the world. And you will have to go into those places that are dark. Because that's what we're called to do. The reality is it's really easy to not do that. It's safe and it's comfortable to just stay in that light. It's easy because we know what it is. We're familiar with it. The familiar is always easier. Everybody knows this, right? Why do we not like change? Well, we don't like change because we have to do something new, and I don't want to do something new. It's uncomfortable to go out. It's uncomfortable to challenge those things that would attack us. It's easier to retreat or to just let it be or suck it up or let it roll down our backs. But that's not what we're called to do. The last 7 weeks have been one long endeavor for us to see how God is working in our life. Because if you can't see how God is working in your life, how can you see where God is calling you in your life? If you live a life and you don't know what your blessings are, it may be that you don't know where you're being blessed. And if you don't know where you're being blessed, then maybe it is the only thing you see are the negatives in your life. If all you see are the negatives in your life, then everything looks horrible, doesn't it? Everywhere you turn, you're missing this, you're not getting this, someone's attacking you here, your work is horrible, your life is horrible, you don't have any friends, you're lonely, people don't like you. That is not truth. Those are lies. If you believe them long enough, you'll find yourself on a path that isn't desirable. So these last 7 weeks, we've been working diligently to find where God is working in our life, so that the path that we're going on, if it isn't the one that God intended us to be, we might make those choices. It's not an accident that the 7th week coincides with today, the Reformation. The Reformation is the day that Martin Luther, and it's technically on Saturday, this Saturday, went to the church, which was the center of the universe, and in a town that he was in, it was the center of his world, and he nailed his whole laundry list of things that the church was doing wrong. I think that's an amazing thing. We should pay attention, because if ever you think that I'm perfect or the church is perfect, think again. The church is full of people. We get it wrong. The reason we're coinciding the Reformation, the 500th anniversary of the church trying to get it right. with our 7-week trial of trying to get it right and be transformed, is because we need to be transformed. We need to be reformed. We need to be more than whatever else we think we are. We can be who it is that God has called us to be. And God's call is not to stand in the street light. It is, in fact, to be the light. It is to leave the street light, and then when you go into the darkness, be the light of the world, is what we're called to do and be. To bring the light with you so that those who have lost their way in the darkness might be able to follow you, might say, hey, look, there's somebody. And then you know what? Not only do you go into the darkness, you bring people into the light. This is the very beginning of the Gospel of John. You don't need to know numbers. Just open the Gospel of John and read the first 4 verses. It'll blow your mind. Jesus was the light. He came into the world. He was the Word. The Word didn't like it. The world didn't like it. But we love Him because He changes us, because we know who He is, because with Him we can do miracles. Which is why we don't have a gospel reading today. Did you notice that we didn't read from Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or John? That's why Marcus didn't make it up here for the children's sermon, because he was waiting for that gospel, and then it didn't show up, and he got sideswiped. Yeah, Marcus, throwing you under the bus, buddy. No, okay, so you know the story of David and Goliath, right? Everybody knows the story of David and Goliath. We teach it in Sunday school. You've known it for years. Little kid comes up to the big giant, knocks him on the head with a rock, and everything's wonderful, right? You don't know the story at all. I'm telling you, you probably don't actually know what's going on in the story. Because usually we talk about the story as this improbable victory, and that is not at all what the story is. It's not an improbable victory. On the surface, it looks like an improbable victory. You have this kid who is conquering this warrior, a giant nonetheless, a child who overcame a giant, a man who's wearing armor and weapons, and he knows all of the ins and outs, and you have this sheep herder with a rock and a sling. So let's back up for a second. Let's talk about ancient warfare. Ancient warfare had different units. Cavalry unit would have been the chariot, just some dudes on a horse, or on a chariot behind a horse. They were the shock troops. They were the forces to go in and scatter anything. Okay, well, you can't do that. If you paid attention, they're on these valleys. So if any of the one troop decided to come to the other, they would have had the lower ground. So neither of these troops were willing to rush the other one because it would have immediately put them at a disadvantage, which meant their shock troops, the chariots, weren't going to work. All right, so chariots are out. Heavy cavalry. All right, this is, guys in armor. These would have been the troops, the rank and the file. Now, if they were going to start marching down the valley, you would have encountered the next troop, which would have been artillery. Nobody's making a cross at that valley with a shower of arrows. And then you also would have had slingers. Slingers are who you roll out when you have heavy armor coming at you. And these are guys who don't have armor, and they have just this rocks and a sling. It could be a leather sling, but it's usually just a strap with some kind of a pocket on it, and then you go down to the river or something like this and get a nice smooth stone, just so that when you threw it, it wouldn't catch. And what you do is you take the stone and you put it into this pocket, and you swing that pocket around, and then you release one end of the strap, and the rock goes flying out. This is not a slingshot. That image of Dennis the Menace with the slingshot, that's a child's toy. This is a weapon. Now, slingers can sling that thing. They can spin that sling 6 to 7 revolutions a second. Which means that it can travel, that little bullet can travel about 35 meters a second. Which means 100 feet. So that's like me to Zane. Zane, wave your hands, right? I can put my little rock through the air in a second. Goliath could never have seen that coming. He had a second to react. That little bullet, that little rock was going to reach him before he had any idea what was going on. And that rock was probably barium sulfate. This is a heavy rock, right? This isn't pumice. This is a very dense material. And so some people who are much smarter than I am did the math. All right, circular momentum and velocity, and you sling it, and it's going at this rate. It turns out that when David released his rock, it was going at the velocity of a .45 caliber bullet. Goliath brought a knife to a gunfight. And these slingers can hit birds in flight, which means the small of Goliath's face is nothing. He is easily accomplishable. And Goliath, he comes in and says, "Come to me." He's taunting David. He says, "Come to me." Why? Because Goliath has a sword. He has a spear. He wants hand-to-hand combat. What good is a shield and a sword if you're not going to be in front of me? David's not an idiot. He's not going to go anywhere near that guy. That guy is huge. He's enormous. David decided he was going to change the rules. He was going to go into combat with his sling, and he wasn't going to tell his enemy. Well, that's a good thing to do if you're going to conquer your enemy. Don't tell him how you're going to change the rules. And he surprised him with superior technology. More importantly, David walked down to that battlefield with the Lord. He walked down there knowing God was going to be there. He walked out on faith knowing that this battle was going to be for God's glory and not his own. Why do we call this an underdog fight? David walked in with superior technology, a surprise battle, and with God. This isn't an underdog. This is a slaughter, which is exactly what happened. And the reason we call it an underdog story is because we don't understand what's going on. We didn't understand what David was doing when he walked into that battlefield, and we don't understand who Goliath is. Goliath is supposed to be this indomitable warrior, this undefeatable thing. But look, he walks down onto the battlefield with an attendant, okay? And he moves slowly. He takes his time. And for whatever reason, when he looked at David, he didn't figure out that he didn't have any armor on. He didn't figure out that this boy is in front of him and he didn't have a sword and a shield. Why didn't he know that? Shouldn't it have been clear to him that there was a boy in front of him who had no intentions of engaging in hand-to-hand combat with Goliath, but instead, Goliath just taunts him. He says, "Am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks?" Sticks. Sticks. Did you hear that? Sticks, plural. David didn't have sticks. He had a stick. He didn't have plural sticks. So modern science can teach us a little bit about why it is that David and Goliath's fight was never a fair fight. And we know this because if we look at a little bit of what Goliath was, then we can get another insight as to how it is God might work in our life. You see, endocrinology, modern science, the study of your glands, right? Your pituitary gland is up here in the back of your neck, up in your head. And men who have Goliath's size all tend to have the same disease. I think it's over 99% of the people who are giants, as we would call them, have what we call acromegalia, or giantism. You know these people. Anybody know Andre the Giant? Yeah, Andre the Giant, 7'4", 540 pounds. It's kind of hard to think about how big 7'4", 540 pounds is. So here, this is a picture of Andre the Giant holding a beer can. Puts it into perspective. And Andre the Giant wasn't the biggest of all the giants. The largest, says Guinness Book of World Records, is a man named Robert Wadlow. Robert was 8'11" and some change. He was truly a towering man. And so when we talk about giants, and Goliath is one of these giants, he was somewhere in between Goliath and Andre the Giant and Robert, right? He was a big, big dude. Like bigger than big. We know big men. There are big people in our congregation. I'm sure you know these people, right? These are big giants in every sense of the word. But the side effect of acromegalia, or the way that it happens is it's a tumor that grows on the pituitary gland. That's why these people get so big. The problem with that is that right around there, where that tumor is growing, is the optic nerve. Goliath couldn't see. Why did he move slowly? Because he was afraid he was going to trip. Why did he have a boy in front of him? So that he could be led down this rocky path down the valley so he wouldn't fall. Why can't he see that David doesn't have a sword? Because he can't see. Why did he say, "You come to me with sticks"? Because he saw double vision. Goliath was not a horrible, indomitable warrior. He was a human. Mighty warrior is all anybody saw. They didn't see literally what he saw. Now, David didn't care what Goliath could do or see. He went with the Lord. David didn't know anything about physics and why it is that the sling he was bringing to that battlefield was the superior technology. He just went with the Lord. David didn't know that this mighty warrior had a flaw that was never going to be a problem. That David was going to walk into that field and destroy Goliath. Nobody saw. This is a mountain moved. This is how God moves mountains. We look from our perspective, and if we were to look from David's perspective, we might see the exact same thing. Hey, he's young, and he's not a warrior, and this is a giant, and we would say, oh my goodness, there's no way he can win this fight. But God doesn't see these things. He knows the other realities that we don't know. That this giant was never going to put up a fight. And the difference is not that David had special tools. Everybody had slings. Those were common. And it wasn't that David had special talents. There were lots of people in the world who could use slings just as well as David. David was not unique in his gifts. He was unique in his faith. He understood who he was. He understood his vocation in the world. He understood that he was king, anointed by God to lead his people. And he was going to do what was necessary to do that. If that meant the impossible, well, he was going to go doing the impossible, which is why he marched down in the middle of that valley and took on a giant. Y'all have big giants in your world. I don't know what your giants are. You know what they are. You look at them and you accept them as reality. You say, okay, well, that's just how it is. That's how my life has to go. That's where I find myself. And you just accept that reality. I'm telling you, God is calling you to something even bigger. Maybe bigger than you could imagine. Maybe something impossible. Maybe God is going to move a mountain in your world, but would you walk down the valley to let him? Would you stare at your giant and say, I come in the name of the Lord? You come at me with swords. I come with the Lord. Would you give all of that up so that you might be in the position that God has called you to be, or don't you know that God is calling you to be? This is why we spent the last 7 weeks. This is why we will continue to be in Bible studies. This is why we will continue to worship our Lord, so that we can be for Him who He's called us to be. Dean Porter was just here. We're going to go do Hunger Fight. Why? Because there are kids out there who need food. Y'all going to feed them. I mean, this is biblical stuff. Think about it. When Jesus turned the loaves and fish into thousands of food, we're going to do the exact same thing. For the money that you would buy a loaf of bread, we're going to literally feed thousands. That is biblical stuff. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is still so much more. And it doesn't happen on accident. If you haven't tested God, I would encourage you. Try Him. Step out. Go by faith. See if it doesn't go for you God's way. It's not your way, mind you. God's way. What does God's way look like? I don't know. It looks different for everybody. It looks different for every situation. It looks different for all the ways in which you find yourself. But it looks like God. And if you study and you understand, then it will be clear and obvious. You will say, I didn't expect this. This is too good. How can I turn this away? This is unbelievable. I can't imagine that this door would have opened. How did this mountain move? How could I have ever found myself here? And that's when you thank God that He has for us a bigger plan, not to just stand in the light that He's created, but to be the light for His creation. To be more than street light people, to be transformed so that we might do more than just survive, that we might thrive. Thanks be to God.